In May 2010, we did one of our most extensive trips to France. Unusually for us, we started our visit in Lorraine, in the northeast part of the country. As has become our habit, we used a couple of guidebooks to select several areas we toured in detail. And so it was that we found ourselves driving out of Charles de Gaulle on the A4, headed direct to Rheims, 150 kilometers distant. Shortly, the majestic cathedral of Notre Dame de Rheims came into view, dominating all around. A quick look at the tourist map of central Rheims illustrates a common characteristic of French towns, that is, that the most impressive buildings in these towns are frequently monumental churches that took hundreds of years to build. For more than 10 centuries, starting with the baptism of Clovis in 496, French kings were crowned by the Archbishop of Rheims at this location. On July 16, 1429, the English abandoned Rheims on the approach of Joan of Arc, who had Charles VII of France crowned in the cathedral the following day. The cathedral was extensively damaged by German shelling in World War I, and a multi-decade international effort, which actually continues to this day, has restored the cathedral to its former magnificence. We visited the Palace of the Thou, adjacent to the cathedral, where French kings stayed during the coronation ceremonies. Looking at the garments, it certainly didn't look as if French kings were deprived. It wasn't all churches in Rheims. We checked out the Midtown action scene, including a rather Gallic Irish pub, did a little shopping, went to a recommended boulangerie where I got my first of several French steak tartares. Later we visited the Porte Mare, erected by the Remi in honour of Emperor Augustus, and that night started to acclimatise to the cramped quarters for what passes for 3-star hotel rooms in France. Before leaving Rheims, we also visited the site where Eisenhower received the final German surrender on May 7, 1945. Verdun was perhaps the most sinister and provocative place we visited in France. Here, over the space of 11 months in 1916, approximately 800,000 French and German troops were casualties in the biggest and most destructive battle of all time. Verdun occupies an important offensive role in French history because of its strategic position on the River Meuse. A Gallic town, in 1843 it was the site of the division of the Empire of Charlemagne. Verdun was increasingly fortified over the centuries, and by the beginning of World War I was surrounded by 2 concentric rings of forts. The German attack was designed to break the French army through brutal attrition. The battle itself degenerated into a series of captures and recaptures of the various forts. This is Fort Vaux, where after a valiant defence, the French yielded when all ammunition was expended. This is the location whose commander uttered the famous phrase, "This is my last pigeon," as he dispatched his last homing pigeon to his command. It's hard to imagine the horrors that this land has seen, though the remains of shelling is still very visible in the open spaces. And the battlefield still yields bodies and war debris to this very day. This is the Lassois de Douaumont, which contains the exposed remains of 130,000 unidentified French and German soldiers. Eventually, after 11 months of carnage, the German strategy failed. Having expended 40 million artillery shells in an area roughly 3 miles by 3 miles, crowded with 2 million men, the Germans finally were pushed back to their starting positions. So we toured the battlefield and museums, spent a pleasant night in the modern town of Verdun, and the following morning drove the 80 kilometers to Metz, followed by some ghosts.
Ooh.
Metz, like many of these French cities, has a storied history. This is what it looked like in 200 AD as a Celtic city. And you can see the Celtic influence in the sacramentary of Dorgo, Charlemagne's son, who was Bishop of Metz in 850. Because of its proximity to Germany, it also has many historical and cultural links to that country. The site of St. Stephen's Cathedral in Metz was first consecrated in the 5th century. Construction of the present church was commenced in 965, but a Gothic reconstruction started in 1220 and didn't finish until 1552, 332 years later. The stained glass windows, the largest expanse of stained glass in the world, were added in the 14th century. In the 20th century, the artist Marc Chagall added 3 further windows. We checked out 2 further things in Metz. Our first French market, with a bewildering selection of things the French, and sometimes only the French, are prepared to eat. And the Aqueduct de Gorges, part of a 23-kilometre aqueduct constructed by the Romans, including 118 arches to bring water to Roman Metz. So, having completed the northern part of our first tour, we now briefly visited 2 towns before heading to Burgundy. Liverdun is a pleasant medieval town with an impressive view over a curve in the Moselle. Is that a kestrel? It's noted for the kestrels that nest in the old buildings and take advantage of the updrafts off the river. Toul is a walled city with a long history. These ramparts were last used for defense during the Prussian War in 1870, when 2,400 shells were hurled at them and led to the town's surrender. During World War I, up to 45 squadrons of US planes were based here. The Gothic Cathedral of St. Etienne is gradually being restored. Toul completed the Lorraine section of our tour. It was time to head to Burgundy, so we drove the 200 kilometers to Dijon, where we spent the night. There's more to Dijon than just this. Indeed, overall Dijon was probably the most delightful of the French cities we visited. We stayed in an Ibis hotel as a change from the traditional French hotel and got functioning elevators and a little bit more room. We ate in a fun brasserie near the hotel where we befriended a visiting Swiss and spent the following morning exploring. Though occupied many times in its history, the city somehow avoided the destruction visited on many other French cities, and so presents a wonderful mix of architecture, including houses intact since the 12th century. It was here that we saw the first example of distinctive Burgundian roofs made of tiles glazed in a mixture of materials and colour. It goes without saying that Dijon has more than its share of magnificent churches. Here's one. As the former centre of the House of Burgundy, Dijon shows lots of evidence of an earlier wealthy period. As it was Saturday morning, there were lots of street vendors, and we also spent time in the huge market designed by Gustave Eiffel of Eiffel Tower fame. So it was time to embark on the second tour in earnest, driving the 60 kilometres from Dijon to Flavigny. The road to Flavigny took us over some pretty rural roads as we punched into the heart of Burgundy. Finally, Flavigny came into view. Flavigny itself is a delightful old fortified village on a hill and is classed as one of the most beautiful villages in France. It was first mentioned as the location of a Benedictine monastery in 719. The village was captured by the English during the 100 Years' War, and the abbey was later damaged during the French Revolution, but today Flavigny is the location of a seminary of St. Pius X. Flavigny is the unique location of the manufacture of licorice-flavoured candy, first manufactured by the monks, and a delightful fable surrounds the origins of these sweets. Flavigny's more recent claim to fame is that it was the location chosen for the film Chocolat, starring Juliette Binoche and Lena Olin. So, having checked out the Lena Olin Flavigny haunts, we had lunch in the oldie ancient lunch place and pushed on to Saumur. Saumur-en-Artois, to give the town its full name, is built on a bluff over the river Armachon and has an attractive medieval core.
Where's the cafe?
We checked out the centre, visited the Church of Notre Dame, which dates from the 11th century, and in it found a memorial to the men of the 78th Division of the US Army who fell in the Great War. Then, being movers and groovers, we didn't hang about and pushed on for 43 kilometres to Avallon. Avallon is a Roman town which started as a mutatio, or place to get fresh horses. Today its economy depends on the manufacture of biscuits and gingerbread. One anecdote concerns the English king Riatamus, who died nearby fighting for the Romans against the Goths in 470. Historians perceive him as a possible candidate for the historical King Arthur, with Avallon corresponding to the Arthurian Avalon. In Avallon we looked around, visited the church of Saint Lazare from the 12th century, and visited some art exhibitions, notably a rather harrowing exhibit called Miserere by the 20th century artist Georges Rouault. But it was now after 4 o'clock, so off we went to Vézelay, 15 kilometres away. Vézelay dates from the 9th century, when the Benedictines were given the land to form a monastery. The town is interesting for a variety of reasons. First, the location on top of a hill is quite spectacular. Second, the Basilica of Vézelay houses the relics of Mary Magdalene, brought here during the first millennium. And third, both the second and third crusades either started or were launched from here. We briefly examined the art shops that lined the road to the basilica, and as we'd been on the road from Dijon for some time, headed to Chateau Chinon, where we arrived after 7 p.m. and stayed for the night. Apart from the usual tight space, Chateau Chinon didn't hold a lot of interest, so after breakfast we headed to Autun. Autun, founded during the reign of the first Emperor Augustus, is an interesting place and shows lots of signs of its founders. Indeed, the city was rescued from a siege by a tribe of Alunai in 356 by the timely arrival of the Emperor Julian. Another point of interest is that in 725 Autun represented the westernmost advance of the Umayyad Caliphate, based in Damascus. Shocking in today's context to see how far west Islam had advanced. The Roman theatre, still in use today, was one of the largest in the Western Empire, with a 17,000 seat capacity. And the Roman walls are impressive in any millennium. We took the drive to the hill overlooking the town, where a cross commemorates the town's World War II liberation. Then, after Mass in the cathedral, and a candle lit for the yet-to-arrive Griffin Conway, we had a pleasant lunch in a great bistro and headed off for the beginnings of some serious Burgundy wine exploration. Our first move was to drive the 42 kilometers to Meursault, where we did our first chateau visits. We looked at the city hall and the town centre, became friends with the dog at the Chateau de Chiton, and visited the Chateau de Meursault. However well regarded Meursault whites are, there is no Grand Cru. This of course was well below our standard, so we decided to move on, completing the second half of our tour, starting at Chateau Chinon and ending in Beaune. In Beaune, we stayed and ate in a pleasant little hotel only 100 yards from the famous Hospice de Beaune, a charitable hospital for the poor established in 1443 by the Chancellor of Burgundy. It is one of the finest examples of French 15th century architecture. Since its founding, the original hospital in Beaune has become a museum, and modern hospitals maintained through charity operate throughout the area. If you were poor in the 15th century, and if you were lucky, you might be accommodated in a hospital which was a showpiece of art and beauty. Beaune is the centre of a very important wine area and is surrounded by numerous famous wine villages. The area has over 30 Grand Cru, so things are serious in the wine department. Each November, the most important wine auction in France takes place in the old hospital. Interestingly, in Beaune, we almost bought a series of paintings of New York by a French artist. We looked around the city centre and then embarked on a little side tour of the Côte d'Or. To do this, we drove 47 kilometers almost to Dijon again, and then headed down the tour route, stopping at Chenôve, Gevrey-Chambertin, Vougeot, and Nuits-Saint-Georges along the way. Our visit to Chenôve was brief, visiting the chateau which gives its name to the Marsanne wine made here. Gevrey-Chambertin had to be treated with more respect. A village of 3,000 people, it manages to produce 8 of the 33 Burgundy Grand Cru, all being extracted from an area totaling 700 acres. An archaeological dig in 2008 confirmed that Gevrey-Chambertin was a producer of Roman wines as early as 1 BC. This archaeological discovery corroborates texts written by Pliny the Elder, making it credible that the Gallo-Roman wines in Gevrey-Chambertin were the first wines to be planted in Bourgogne. In Gevrey, Margaret spent some time negotiating for some Grand Cru from the bemused owner of a vineyard. Margaret shamelessly insisted that Napa wines were superior and hit him with a major line of the technical details of the Napa process which led to the superiority. Finally, the poor man, who was very nice, accepted defeat and conceded Margaret's sacrificial price. So, complete with our major investment, we pushed on to Vougeot. At Vougeot, we visited the most attractive winery we saw in France, Clos de Vougeot. The winery was established by the Cistercian monks between the 12th and 14th century. The chateau was added in the 15th century. At 125 acres, it is the largest vineyard in the Côte de Nuits entitled to the Grand Cru designation. However, the land was confiscated from the church during the French Revolution and has since been acquired and subdivided to the point that today, about 80 landowners own Clos de Vougeot. Two tidbits. Since 1945, the chateau has been the headquarters of the La Confrérie des Chevaliers de Dastre, founded in 1703, whose main purpose seems to be to encourage the use of Burgundian wines in regional cuisine and to have major parties. Finally, Clos de Vougeot was the featured wine in the famous movie Babette's Feast. Highly recommended to those who haven't seen it. Many would say that Nuits Saint-Georges is as eminent as Gevrey-Sombreton, but no Grand Crus there. So we dashed through Nuits Saint-Georges more because Margaret was exhausted from her recent victory than because we considered the lack of Grand Crus to be fatal. So by now we had completed one tour in the Lorraine area and really two tours in the Burgundy area. So it was time to drive south for 110 kilometers to Châtillon-sur-Chalaronne and begin our third tour. This tour would expose some very different countryside and would end in Lyon. So St. Vincent de Paul was curate of Châtillon, preaching from the Church of St. Andrew, and founded the Brotherhood of Charity and Hospital in 1617. Châtillon is a mix of old and new, with modern industries mixing with a still active 16th century covered market still in active use. The town is also notable for its floral displays, though we weren't there when that was at its best. So we continued on to Vaux-en-Beaujolais. This village was immortalized by the satirical book Cloche-Merle, which dealt with the installation of the first public toilet. The story was in a famous TV series starring Peter Ustinov, Cyril Cusick and Wendy Hiller. We looked everywhere in Vaux, but couldn't find the damn toilet. It's a big regret to this very day. Crestfallen, we pushed on, through rolling and wooded Beaujolais wine country, the 62 kilometers to Rouen. In Rouen we found the usual cramped but quaint accommodations at the centrally located Grand Hotel, opposite the station. Rouen has a long history, but the reason we were there was because of its gastronomic reputation, particularly the Trois Gars, 3 Michelin star restaurant opposite the station. This restaurant has been rated the best in the world at one point. In the end, we were too cheap to pay the exorbitant prices there and settled for the half the price excellent restaurant As 3 a couple of doors down. Even though we didn't eat in the Trois Gras, we feel it important to share a blurry iPhone photo of our menu with you. We departed Rouen early and headed for Chazelles-sur-Lyon. Wikipedia describes Chazelles as a commune of the Loire department in central France, and that's about all it finds useful to say about it. But Chazelles learnt from returning crusaders how to make felt, and the townspeople turned that skill into a major hat-making industry. So we visited the Hat Museum and later purchased some items for the still-awaited Griffin Conway in the country market there. Another reason to cross the Atlantic and visit Chazelles, not mentioned by Wikipedia. The pastries in the local patisserie verge on the divine. But we couldn't stay eating pastries forever, so we pushed off in search of the Col de Malval. Are you coming over, you lazy? We solicited help from the locals on the way, but what we got was very limited. The Col and the associated Eagle Auditorium is really in the back of Beyonce. This is also lost in the bowels of trying to get to this eagle-y place. Eventually we found it and filed in with several busloads of French school children. Okay. We were definitely given a convincing display, if we ever doubted it, that eagles are extremely good flyers. And if you're a cat or a mouse, you don't want to mess with them. Finally, one of the eagles, who'd been targeting me for a while, hit me with his wing, so we decided it was time to bug out of there. He hit me! So we drove almost into Lyon, and then out to Polymieux to see the Maison d'Ampère, a museum dedicated to the inventions, and remarkable they are, of André Ampère, who gave his name to the unit of electricity, the amp. There's another little French story here. It was difficult to find the museum, and it was closed when we arrived. So we were trying to get the museum opening hours from the museum cat when the departing curator spotted us, opened the museum just for us, and patiently showed us around the exhibits at no admission charge. He would have gone on indefinitely, but conscience dictated that we let the poor man go home. That night we slept in the rather Spartan conditions of a converted seminary, still run by nuns. Pack up going on here. It's now getting to the desperate stage, because we're providing a laundry service in this car as well. And this is the converted seminary where we stayed last night. Having taken care of the laundry, we headed out along the banks of the River Saône to the attractive riverside town of Rachatelie to see the Auto Museum of Henry Mallart. He bought the 12th century castle in 1959 and placed there his collection of cars that he started in 1931. The museum houses one of the greatest car collections in Europe, with the oldest car dating from 1892. Several notable cars are included, including Hitler's Mercedes and John Paul II's Popemobile, and numerous others. Now we left Rachatelie and headed into Lyon proper. Lyon is the second largest metropolitan area of France, second only to Paris. It was founded in 43 BC and today is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Lyon was the capital of Gaul and a centre of German control in World War II. Our 4-hour visit obviously couldn't do justice to such an historic city, but we saw enough to know it's worth a detailed look. We visited the central area, had lunch, took the funicular railway up to Fourvière, visited the stunning Basilica of Notre Dame de Fourvière, enjoyed the view of the city from the hill, and walked around some of the old city. Final point, Lyon is known as the culinary capital of the world, but time didn't permit a full exploration of this. We had now completed our third tour, and it was time to hook up with Pat and Jack at Saint-Rémy-de-Provence to give it its full name. So we drove the 247 kilometers to Saint-Rémy, arriving at the lovely house they had rented just in time for a good Pat meal. Next day we all drove the 74 kilometers to Aix-en-Provence. We were primarily there to see some exhibits of Paul Cézanne, but Aix has much more to it than just Cézanne. The first thing we did was take the bus tour. A Roman city founded in 123 BC, it's certainly been the scene of lots of action. Notably the Battle of Aquae Sextiae in 102 BC, when a Frankish assault on Italy was defeated by the famous Roman general Gaius Marius. It was successively occupied and plundered by the Visigoths, the Franks and Lombards and the Saracens. Indeed, the defeat of the Saracens by Charles Martel in 737 and his subsequent occupation of Aix was arguably the ultimate reversal of Islam's advance and the beginnings of the social structures of the Middle Ages, such as feudalism and knighthood. When the bus tour was over, we had lunch, then Pat and Jack went in pursuit of some serious Cézanne. We had a look around the city centre, including here, where Cézanne was baptised, and here, where Hemingway lowered many a glass. Then we did a little Cézanne ourselves. We found our way to the Musée Granet, which has a permanent Cézanne exhibit. Cézanne was born in Aix in 1839 to a wealthy banking family. His first drawing instruction was received from a Spanish monk, and though he studied law at the University of Aix at his father's insistence, he continued to pursue his art secretly. His life ended essentially as a recluse and ill from diabetes. However, his was an extraordinarily productive output, and we managed to catch a few of his originals. Then we all returned to Saint-Rémy and were treated to a wonderful traditional French meal cooked by the lady who manages the house. The following morning, Margaret and I did a mini tour of the area, stopping at Les Baux de Provence, Arles, the Museum of the Camargue, and making it to the Mediterranean at Méjean. Les Baux de Provence has been used as a fortress since 6000 BC because of its commanding position on a hilltop. The castle became a centre of Protestantism and was finally demolished by order of Cardinal Richelieu in 1632. Interestingly, it was granted to the Grimaldi family in 1642 under the title Marquis de Beau, and the title is used by Princess Caroline of Monaco. On we went to Arles, the unofficial capital of the Camargue. There's too much history in this town to do justice to it here. Suffice to say, it was of critical importance to the Romans and later to the Church. As we entered the town, we drove by several kilometres of Roman aqueduct. The city contains a remarkable amount of Roman remains, including an arena where bullfights are still conducted today. Mostly these are the Provence style, where the bull is not killed, but each September Arles holds Spanish-style corridas, in which the bulls are killed. Preceding each corrida is an encierro, in which the bulls are run through the streets. Other tidbits. The movie Ronin was largely shot in Arles, and the artist Vincent van Gogh produced over 300 paintings while he lived in Arles, including this one of an Arles cafe at night. Now we pushed over to the Museum of the Camargue. The Camargue is designated as a wetland of international importance south of Arles, formed by the two arms of the Rhone Delta. The precise boundaries are constantly shifting as the Rhone disgorges mud and changes its route. The area was originally developed by Cistercian and Benedictine monks in the Middle Ages. One of the notable features of the Camargue is the Camargue breed of horse, a small, hardy, intelligent horse which flourishes in herds, frequently in the wild. They are the traditional mount of the Gaudion, the Camargue cowboys who herd the black Camargue bulls used in bullfighting in southern France. Camargue horses galloping through water is a popular and romantic image of the region. But you already knew this if you've seen the movie A Man and a Woman. Margaret was absolutely determined to see the Mediterranean on this tour, so we followed our nose and the limited Camargue roads. Eventually, we had to trespass into a private horse farm, which you can see in the satellite view, and peek over the private bull ring and get a view. But my God, we saw the Mediterranean, here's proof. So back to Saint Remy we went, taking in the ruins of the Roman city of Glanum, just south of Saint Remy on the way. And on arrival, rousted Jack from whatever he was doing, which probably wasn't that much, and insisted that he honour his commitment to a walking tour of Saint Remy.
But not yet.
Not yet, no, we have to sort of work up a frenzy. Anyway, once we got him going, Jack really got into it. So we walked around, checked out everything, and particularly checked out the ice cream. Saint Remy has an attractive centre. The city is notable as the birthplace of Nostradamus, the 16th century author of prophecies. Princess Caroline of Monaco lived here for several years following the death of her second husband. Vincent van Gogh, whom we met already in Arles, spent essentially the last year of his life in a mental hospital in Saint Remy, and his work here is adjudged amongst his greatest. Here are two paintings he produced in Saint Remy. So we had a nice walking farewell to Saint Remy. That evening I took a few shots of the house and we did our preliminary packing. During our stay in the house, the long-awaited Griffin Conway finally showed up. So we became grandparents there, to add to all the other pleasant memories. We walked the short distance to Chez Laura and said goodbye to Nikki and CB, who were leaving very early in the morning. The following morning, with the alarm sounding, we loaded up the car and locked up the house.
Okay, is everybody out?
Well, we can't say about Jack. Jack is...
Oh, is he not here?
Then we drove the 230 kilometers to Cap d'Antibes. We did this for a couple of reasons. Someone in the group, who shall be nameless, insisted on seeing the Mediterranean one more time. But someone else, who shall also be nameless, wanted to know for sure if all this talk about Mediterranean toplessness was true or not. Being in Cap d'Antibes, of course we tried our best to look cool, but we were constantly bested by French chic. So what of the reasons that brought us to Cap d'Antibes? Well, we can say for sure that indeed is the Mediterranean. And what about the toplessness? Well, this is a family movie, so all we can say here is that the evidence seems to suggest that yes, indeed, it exists. So on that note, it was time to get to the airport at Nice and draw a close to our French Odyssey for 2010. With the places we had seen in Provence, we had added a fourth segment to our trip. And throughout, we'd have to say we'd met with nothing but courtesy and a willingness to speak English when our French wasn't up to the situation. One remarkable comment, which causes me to revise my hitherto jaundiced view of the French. In all those kilometres of driving, even when we were slow and uncertain, not a single horn was blown at us throughout. That kind of attitude deserves a return visit.